Tips and tricks for not wasting your time when you're world building in tabletop RPGs.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. All right, guys, I have an amazing episode today. We just dive into some really key and basic concepts around world building. So game masters and dungeon masters don't spin their wheels creating tons of material that their players never see or that they don't even care about. So here is today's interview. My guest today is a retired Air Force pilot and dungeon master guru, the Major. Major, welcome back to the show.
Matt, thank you so much, man, for having me back. It's a pleasure. I really am happy to be back on Dice Geeks.
No, absolutely. And our last conversation, we dove into kind of your role-playing history and that we talked a lot about the games that you run. And we've also mentioned not only have you started writing some D&D kind of related guides and things like that, but you actually teach classes on how to be a dungeon master. Isn't that right?
That's right. Yeah. First class, we discussed the 3 rules to being a great dungeon master. And that's one of my classes that kind of my introduction class to dungeon mastering. And we'll just do a quick review of that before I get into the world building. But this class is also one I teach. I call it the Major's Guide to World Building. And that is something that probably more than any other specific topic I see, there's just so much. It's so easy to get wrapped around the axle when it comes to world building and playing, a game like Dungeons and Dragons. And this really applies to any role playing game. I've had people in my class that talk about, hey, they're coming to it from for instance, like say the game Dune. I had a fellow in my class one time who was really excited about playing Dune. He wanted to know, hey, the world exists already. It's Frank Herbert's world from the Dune series, of course, and the game they got an established world, or maybe you're playing in Middle Earth, if you're having a game in Middle Earth, and what are some of the facets of world building in the world that already exists? And those are all great questions. And of course, the king of all DM projects is I'm going to build my own world. And so, how do you do that? What are some of the pitfalls? What are some of the things that you maybe should think about? What are some of the things that you definitely want to avoid? And what are some of the pitfalls? And so that's kind of the essence of the class.
Okay. Yeah. And we talked about your first class, your 3 rules for dungeon mastering. We talked about that last time. And so, right. Yeah, we thought we would dive into world building here today.
Absolutely.
Yes. Since you say that a lot of your students have a lot of questions about world building and you bring up a few interesting ideas, like even using like a licensed property using Dune or some other game, right? Once you start creating stuff, it takes on a life of its own, right?
Absolutely. And that's the real kind of takeaway is that even if you're, say you're playing a role-playing game that is involved or set in the Middle Earth, Tolkien's Middle Earth. And there's a lot of material out there to help you or that's already made. Or say even, pardon me, say you're in the Forgotten Realms. I mean, there's a lot of material that's established already that, okay, you're in the Forgotten Realms. There's still going to be occasions where the particular place you're in is going to not be really well fleshed out. Or maybe you want to flesh it out a little more. Or maybe you want to change it. There's, it's the sky's the limit. And so, how do you go about doing that? That's really kind of the crux of this. And as far as the first class, the only thing I want to mention about the 3 rules, I always in all my classes, always try to cage everyone to remember the The base of 3 rules: love your players, love their characters, love the game, whatever it is you're playing. And remember, it's not my game. It's not your game. It's our game. It's our game. And so when you're building your world, always keep those things in mind. What is enjoyment? What is enjoyable for everyone? And take inputs. A lot of world building is taking inputs from your players. Hey, a lot of times, when I'm dungeon master, and a lot of times, if especially during character creation, if a player says, "Hey, I want to be from this region," I may very well say, "Great, tell me about it," so I can, because I have no idea what's there right now. I mean, even though it's quote my world, I hadn't made that part up. So you make it up.
Yeah.
And
I think that's very important. And sadly, it took me a long time to realize that as a game master or as a dungeon master.
Exactly. Me too. Me too, Matt. And that's why I teach this class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because and I talk about it in my little book, The No Prep Game Master, where it takes so much pressure off the dungeon master if you can just ask your players to create something. And I think it's always, maybe 1 out of 10 times you're going to get the player who's like, well, I'm not creating things, I'm not the game master. But all the 9 other times the player is ready to create something. Don't you find that's the case?
Absolutely. And you want to, again, the game is, social tabletop gaming. The objects have fun. And so let's make sure everyone's having fun. And if that's something fun for that guy, then definitely do that. Mm-hmm. And, especially because it can be incorporated as long as it's, like I said, it's collaborative and in the truest sense of the word. And that I find is the best way to approach the game itself is just as a collaborative effort, and where everyone's playing. That's why I use the term our game. We're playing our game, not my game, not your game. We're playing our game, and where everyone is cognizant of everyone else's enjoyment. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where it really hits on all cylinders. And man, you just maximize your fun.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's, I think that was one of your rules that was really stands out, and that really helps people just really understand, right? It's just like, it's not all up to the game master to spend, 40 hours a week preparing for, a 3-hour session, and the players don't have anything to add to that except for showing up with their character sheet. Right. The players can have input. Right. The dungeon master doesn't have to shoulder all of this stuff and, get stressed out about, oh, well, now somebody wants to be from a different continent, so I have to create that continent or whatever. It's like, no, tell me about your home. And if you want to flavor it, then you can flavor it for them too. You say, oh, you want to be from a faraway island? That's great. What did your people do on that island? And,
right.
And
let's talk about that. Absolutely.
Yeah. And you can kind of maybe flavor it a little bit if you want to keep it in touch with your world and say, okay, it's a faraway island. Well, they don't have iron there. So what did that mean for your people or whatever? And you're just Absolutely. Like, and you can just throw out a little flavor depending on your world or something, but then let that player kind of run and create that, because like at the end, what does it matter, right? What does it matter that some continent somewhere is, the people, are heavily tattooed or hunt saber-toothed tigers or something like that's just all cool stuff. Right.
It's exactly way cool stuff. And you may have a place like, say, if you're playing in the Forgotten Realms, or say if you're playing in like Middle Earth or something, and somebody wants that kind of a background, there may be an option that was within canon, and you can say, hey, if you don't know about that, there's this island here that may work for your purposes. And if it doesn't, well, shoot, let's just make up one.
Yeah.
And we'll just say Tolkien didn't write about that. It doesn't matter. Like you said, it just doesn't matter. Yeah. And it certainly doesn't matter more than the person's enjoyment of the game. That's really what it comes to.
Yeah.
And so my first rule, essential when I teach this, as I said, the first thing you need to understand, but in the kind of the base of this class is, okay, you want to make your own world. You're a dungeon master, and every dungeon master loves to do this. It's like one of the reasons we love to be dungeon masters. We love this kind of creative the creative aspect of coming up with adventures. And I think all of us have really enjoyed the idea of, I want to make my own world. The world, like, because we all read Tolkien and we've all read everything, all the books that we've enjoyed over the years. And, we have that itch. I would like to do something like that. Okay, great. Well, that's great. And let's encourage that. However, boy, can you get wrapped around the axle here. And so that's why come to my class. Okay, here's the first thing I say. Don't build the world, then start playing. Don't do that. Play and then build the world. Build while you're playing. Don't if you wait to I'm going to build this world and then we're going to start playing, you'll never play. Mm-hmm. You'll just sit there the rest of your life and try to make this thing. I mean, don't do that. How the world feels is way more important than any sort of statistical data that it may have. But I am going to give you some statistical data today that you may find very helpful. I found it very helpful, and also found it a little bit illuminating. Because people want to know, well, how do I make my world feel right? And like, they think of things like maybe, how the climate that they're in. And I mean, I just roll some dice and what's the temperature changes and I'm saying, okay, look, that's a little bit into the weeds, but I understand what you're getting at. How do you want the world to feel like a world? I said, look at, I want you to look at entertainment examples. For instance, look at Star Wars. Star Wars has an entire planet that's a desert. Tatooine. It has Hoth, ice world. The whole world is just ice. No one bats an eye. No one blinks at the potential impossibility of a planet that has just one ecosystem. We don't know enough about it. No one bats an eye. We just roll with it. Oh yeah, Tatooine's a desert planet. Oh yeah, Endor is a forest moon. The whole dang thing. Yep. Any other climate? Nope, just forest. Okay. Okay. And no one cares. No one bats an eye. And so remember that. And if you want to make your world like that, no one's really ultimately going to care much. I mean, you can even make something like that work. Something's totally one dimensional if you wanted to. Oh, and by the way, your products, the different ecosystem, the mountains, the swamps, the books you sell.
Yeah, the Game Master Terrain Guide.
Yeah, those are awesome, by the way.
Thank you.
So good job, dude. I mean, seriously. Oh, and I love how you put the Kobold Quarterly world building link up there. Because, man, that's a good one. Oh, my goodness. And that's another thing. There's some that are, I mean, come on, man. We know there's a lot of stuff out there. Some are better than others. And when it comes to world building, there's some stuff that'll lead you down the wrong path, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, let's take a look at you mentioned kind of one of your first principles was to not build the world first and to allow it to build as you're playing. And I really like where you're going with that. And you were talking about trying to get the feeling of your world established with your players. I think that is way more important than, knowing every detail. Because once you give your players a feeling, they can kind of then create characters around that, or you can all, if you're creating characters together as a group and you can kind of get that feel, or if you message everybody in your gaming group and say, hey, I'm thinking of this kind of feeling for the next world. And I want to talk more about that, but I really like the idea of not building it out before you play. Let the play build the world, because there are a number of pitfalls, as you mentioned, and you said, yes, you may never play that world, but also, we will, as a creative person, as creative people, we will fall in love with that world. And if we spend 6 months, 8 months kind of alone, maybe we can't play for a while and we're just creating this world, or maybe I'm thinking back to when I was in high school and I was like 16 or, 15 and and I'm creating this world and we weren't able to play for a while. The next time we get to play, I am like don't you touch my world, man. Don't change my, don't you change my world. This is how it goes. And because I've almost made a novel instead of, a gaming world. Right. And, and is that what you're kind of warning against when you say, let it come out and play?
Absolutely. Because and just like you said, you can spend as much time as you want to spend on world building. I mean, it's a bottomless pit. You can spend as much time as you want to spend on it. I mean, it's a bottomless pit. So don't think that you need to do that, because it'll happen. But there's some benchmark things. There's some there's some things I throw out there that'll help. But let it develop through play. But here's some things that can help you kind of guide the development of your world. And that's kind of what the class is, we'll first have the understanding that don't try to build this whole thing and then play. Don't do that. Let it develop through play. Get the playing is the important part. That's the fun. That's what everybody's here to do. Yeah. So let's do that but you can still do them simultaneously. And in fact, it's better if you do that way, just like you said. So that is the upfront goal of this class, is that, one, have that understanding, and two, here's some tricks or some tips rather, to help you in world building in this fashion. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what we're going to, if you want to get into next, I call it Rule 1A. Go ahead.
Like capturing the feeling of the world. I always think what is really good, maybe to kind of capture a feeling of the world, is kind of that. I know it might be a little cliche in some circles or whatever, but kind of that Hollywood kind of, elevator pitch where it's, blank or something, blank meets blank, and throw things out to players, and to see how they feel about that. And I know some examples I've used on the podcast before is just like, saying something like to my players, hey, I'm thinking of a world, it'd be like, far future, but it's like Firefly meets Marvel superheroes. So it's Firefly, but your characters will have superpowers. Now, Joel,
I am all about using, about using those references.
Yeah. Or, say, it's Mad Max, but we have, but you'll be playing samurai, or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Cool. Yeah.
And I got really good feedback when I pitched those to my group. So I apologize for using those examples. I think I've used them in the podcast before. I just need to think of another one. So something, some other ones, you could even do, say, Mad Max, but you're the gunfighter from the Clint Eastwood spaghetti westerns.
Oh yeah.
And you're just like, done, right?
Those are absolutely, those are great. And those, I'm always, in part of my classes, I always teach use the steel. I would take like what we just did. If you're trying to convey an image, you just use somebody else's work to do that, which is wonderful, and you should do that. Because it encapsulates perfectly what the imagery you're trying to convey, and everybody gets that because I've seen Mad Max and we love it, and we love the the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we love it. Those are great films, and so it totally is appropriate to do that, and I highly encourage that. Or anything from, like maybe someone has read, a work of fiction, or even a real world. And in fact, one of the things I espouse is, my Rule 1A, start local, buy local. That's what I call it. Start local, buy local. And what I mean by that primarily is, where are the characters right now? Like, a lot of the stuff we've been discussing is, hey, we're pitching a new game we're going to be playing. This is kind of my basic idea for the world we'll be playing in. But let's get to specifics. Where are we right now Where are the characters standing? Describe that environment. That is the starting point and the most important part of your world building at this moment, because that's where the characters are. Describe that place. Know what it is. That is the most important part of your world right now, because that's where the characters are. The far-flung continent on the other side that doesn't use iron and has everyone tattooed. That's great to have a knowledge of, but we don't need to flesh that out right now, do we? Because we're not there. Where the characters are, that's what's most important at the moment. And again, you could have been playing for 3 months, but you're in this new place now, maybe, or wherever it is. That's the most important part of your world, by default, because that's where the characters are. That's where the action's happening. So if you need to develop a new part of your world, do so, because you're there. I mean, that's what, and that helps keep you focused. And that's why I like that rule, because it keeps you focused on what's important for the gameplay. In a lot of ways, it's kind of like one of the big MMORPGs, meaning that, say if you're playing Lord of the Rings Online or any of those kind of games, which are great, by the way, they have this vast world, but it doesn't render it all on your computer. It only renders where you're at. And then as you move, it drops away where you've been out of your memory, and it loads in where you're going. Or where you are. So it's kind of like that in a way. You don't have to render it where you're not. Because unless you have already, then it's always there in a tabletop RPG. But if you haven't got there, and if it's not important to the story yet, don't focus on that. Focus on what you need to focus on, and that's the first. That's why I call it the first rule. Start local, buy local. Meaning, where are you? That's important. Let's talk about that world building. And I like to I encourage people to use what they know. Well, you may know some things from a lot of the readings you've done. Maybe you're a really big Dune fan and you know that world inside out. And I mean, you understand that and you want to make your world like that. That's great. I will always suggest use Earth as your basis. Not that means you have to make it like Earth, but if you understand Earth, your local, which we do because we live here, then you can know how to depart from it. You know what I'm saying? You have a base point to depart from, or you can emulate Earth if you wish. It's either way, using what you know makes the job a lot easier. And so that's what I mean by that. So absolutely. I get the biggest question I get in this regard is, well, I don't know how to do settlements, and how do I know how many people live in these places, and how much wilderness should I have? And is it really all this wild land all over the place? And I said, well, those are good questions. Those are great questions. And here's where I'm going to give you some data. Okay. This is some actual real data that I honestly found quite surprising. And this will help you make your world feel right. And that's what I mean by it feels right. Because it may be because it emulates what you see and just kind of internally know because we live in the world we live in, or it may feel right in that it departs from what we know in a certain way. But it feels like the Hoth ice planet. Yeah, no one cares. No one bats an eye. Oh yeah, they just roll with it. Oh yeah, Hoth ice planet. Oh, it's a planet covered in ice. Yeah, that's cool. And no one ever says, well, actually, that's not possible. No one ever says that. They just roll with it. Hoth ice world.
Now, I've been in fandom a long time, Major, so I have seen people say that that's impossible. But that would be the very minority, because I know I watched those movies. I watched that when I was like 9 years old, and it didn't matter, and it still doesn't matter because Hoth is cool.
Exactly
right. So it's
cool.
There.
Exactly.
It's out there.
Right.
If you want to look on the internet, you will find people who say that that's impossible, and it's.
Yeah. But, you know what I mean when I say nobody.
I mean anybody who is sane. Yes, anybody who is sane and normal and doesn't have a problem.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, but very few people will have a problem with this. Yeah, yes. And those people can't sit with me at my They have to go to some other table.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, they can't sit with us cool kids.
Oh yes.
That's
the first time I've been called cool. So there you go.
Oh well, yeah, dude, we're the cool kids now. Trust me.
Yes.
So anyway, what I'm going to tell you is from the UN. I know it's going to be off. This is amazing, but this is really good stuff, and I found this helps me immensely in keeping my sights aligned when it comes to world building. Mm-hmm. According to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization and NASA's Global Rural Urban Mapping Project, which is actually a part of their Socioeconomic Data and Application Center. Basically, the catchphrase is human geography. That they did a huge study. It's amazing. I highly recommend going and looking at it. I have a bit of a background in this type of stuff, but the big takeaways are this: on our planet, we all know that the Earth is mostly covered with water. Okay, we know that. We know that this is big picture stuff. We know that. Two-thirds of the earth is covered in water. So that means a third is land. Of that third that is land, only 71% of it is habitable, meaning the earth, people can't live on, 29% of the land on this planet. And right now, it's pretty impressive. We got about 7+ billion people on the planet. Half of them live on only 1% of the land. Which is shocking but true. Mm-hmm. Half the people on this planet live on 1% of the land. In fact, only 3% of habitable land has been urbanized in any way, and only 16% of just habitable land, not just the land in total, but the habitable land, is currently growing crops. So, to put this in picture, over half of the habitable land on this planet has never been touched in the existence of humankind. It is wilderness, and it always has been wilderness. This is the conclusions that this study found. It was just incredible. Again, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. My point of bringing all this up is, yes, you can have huge parts of your gaming world be completely wide open. Because even in our modern world today, that is the case. There's again, about half of the habitable land has never even been touched by a person. Yeah, and so that does not at all speak to any kind of problem like the challenges of living in a huge urban society. I mean, there's obviously lots of challenges when we choose as a people to cram into 1% of the land. Mm-hmm. I mean, we do that for lots of good reasons, I'm sure. Yeah. But that's in no way it invalidates any sort of real world concerns that are had. Of course, that's why these studies are done. Mm-hmm. But what my point is that, if you keep those kind of stats in mind, it'll help you focus on and make you feel better about. No, you don't have to have a town everywhere, mm-hmm. In your gaming world, you don't. And in fact, you probably shouldn't. Yeah. The 40% of the population lives within 60 miles of a coastline. Another 40 lives near large freshwater sources. People live typically where there's adequate rainfall. That's another obviously thing. China's a really good example. 80%, over 80% of the population of China, which is huge, as we know, famously huge, lives in only about a third of their country. A size of the basically America east of the Mississippi, but not include New England. That's where most of the people live. And the reason for that is it's the only region of China that has 15 inches of rainfall a year or more, which is needed. That's the benchmark. 15 inches or more is what's needed for large groups of people to live in one area. It's 10 inches or less than 10 inches, you're in a desert. That's the classic definition for desert. But 2/3 of a lot of China is the Gobi Desert and the Himalayas. I mean, eastern China is virtually uninhabited. Western China is virtually uninhabited. It's and that's all to do with the total amount of rainfall per year. So once again, as the old adage says, geography determines all. Let that be the case for your game world. Geography determines all. And instead of getting down into the weeds and doing like plate tectonics, and I saw a book actually, dude. I actually own a book on world building that suggests you need to develop the plate tectonics of your world. I'm like, this is junk. This is junk. No, you don't. You do not have to do that.
Yeah, I've actually seen some stuff on that. Actually, I just mentioned it in another podcast I recorded a couple of weeks ago. Do we start with plate tectonics? Because I have seen that before. And yeah, my answer is no.
No.
That if you need plate tectonics, they should come after you've been playing for a while.
Exactly. Exactly.
And, because if you... and what I really like about what you're saying here is I think too, if we're playing kind of a pseudo Middle Ages time, that the land was empty and scary, man. Like it would have been there, if you were on the fringe, you might not see another farmhouse for quite a ways. That's why very few people lived on those fringes, right? That's why everybody crammed into London or wherever they were,
That's right.
Because
and still do.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and they still do.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing how these numbers were really eye-opening when I read this study. Yeah. I'm like, holy moly, this is I never thought that would be so condensed. Yeah. That our population density is so condensed, but it is, and there's still vast amounts of land that not even no one lives in, but haven't ever even been touched by anyone yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, and that's pretty much one reason why, if I'm creating, a campaign setting, or introducing my players to something, or if I need a very large city, if I need a metropolis kind of, huge city, I tend to always put them at a seaport because, because you have a freshwater river. You also have the sea there, because that would be the place where lots of people would gather because of trade, because of fresh water, maybe defensible cliffs and things around the bluffs of the river, something like that. That's where it would be. So usually in my games, especially like Dungeons and Dragon games, if there's a large city, it's probably going to be near a huge river that empties into some kind of vast ocean to pull in all of the trade and things. Stuff would come down the river, stuff comes in from across the sea, all of that, because that's where those places are going to be. And if you're farther up that river, you're probably just going to have a small village of maybe just a few hundred people at most at certain places along that river.
And if you look at the, when you bring up a good point about rivers and in world building, if you're trying to come a place with, okay, I want to put a large city here on this river. And this is the way cities built up in our own world, along rivers, almost invariably. In fact, I don't know of a city that did not build up on a river because of this. Cities built up at natural fords or at fall lines, which is the most of the time they built up at a fall line. So and why was that important? Because they all started out in both cases, the city started out as portages. Because the ship, the boats, the vessels are coming downstream or upstream, doesn't matter. And they hit that fall point, and you can't go over that you can't navigate that. You can't navigate a fall. Mm-hmm. Or if it gets so thin that it's fordable, you can't navigate that either. So you got to put the boat out, carry the stuff across the ford, or carry the stuff down or up the fall, and then carry on your way. And so those portages built up. Enterprising people said, "Hey, for a gold piece in our game world, I'll unload your ship and carry your stuff down to, and we'll land portage your ship down to the next one, down to the bottom of the fall." Mm-hmm. So those or across the ford, those are the main reasons why. If if you look at cities like St. Louis, our own fair city is St. Louis, even the mighty Mississippi, if you look at all the sandbars, when you cross the Chain of Rocks Bridge, there you see why. And, you saw the old, you can see the vestiges of the old bridges. That is why St. Louis was built. Yeah. And its access then to go, and of course its nearness to the Missouri and all the other great rivers that flow into America has the most enviable river system of any country on earth. It's like a built-in interstate system. It is. Of course, it all flows into New Orleans, which is the single greatest port city America has. America's vast trade network of rivers would not work if a city that is supposed to be underwater, New Orleans, isn't maintained. It's vital that New Orleans do what it does. I don't know if you've ever been down to see the docks.
Oh yeah,
they're just massive. Oh my Lord, it's just impressive.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I've been down there, and it is absolutely impressive to think that the whole interior of America, the trade would be completely landlocked if we didn't have the river system. And then I was also thinking, though, just I guess if you're thinking about different climates in that, I was thinking about the Near East over with like Jerusalem and some cities like that. Of course, very ancient cities. They're not built along rivers. They're built where there were sources of fresh water, though, in the form of wells. And the cities over there, of course, have been populated for, several thousand years. Because of the well that was near there. Because there is that source of fresh water that is just there. And so, so that makes that could be an interesting point that you were thinking about, like if you're building your world, if it's a river system like we have here in America, or if it's wells or something else, maybe it's a land just of, you get intense rainfall for like 6 months and you have to save all your water in cisterns or something like that.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about those desert environments. Currently, in America, or not America, in the world, in our world, deserts, which are defined as receiving less than 10 inches of rainfall a year, cover about 20% of our total landmass. Now, notice I didn't say that's habitable, because a lot of our deserts are not habitable, namely the polar deserts of Antarctica and the Arctic. Those are polar deserts, and they're not habitable. But 20% of our total landmass is covered in some sort of desert. And they fall into 5 types. You have subtropical, like the Sahara. You have coastal, like the Atacama in South America, which is gargantuan. And by the way, the oldest deserts on Earth, they think that place has been a desert for 3 million years. It is remarkable. The Atacama is incredible. The rain shadow desert, like Death Valley, the interior desert like the Gobi. We talked about the Gobi earlier, and then polar. That's the 5. So most are uninhabitable, but some are. In fact, 14% of Earth's population live in what's technically a desert environment. Of course, we have them here in America, and people live there. Absolutely, but let's talk about water. Water is, of course, the driving force behind population. You can't live where there's not enough water to live. It's just not possible unless you can get water to it. Like we do with the Colorado River, we put water where water wasn't, and now people can live there. But surface fresh water covers about 1% of the habitable land. However, that's just surface water. Underneath, there's 10 times the amount of the Earth's ocean underneath the Earth of water. There's a bunch of water in the planet. In other words, those deep wells, they are full of fresh water. Even in Death Valley, Matt, in Death Valley, there's over 600 ponds and springs in the middle of Death Valley. There's water. And so, those any habitation that, say, if you want to have a setting that was like Death Valley, which is, intensely hot, intensely dry, there would still be places of water, and those settlements would obviously have to be near there. Furnace Creek is a town in the Death Valley right now in America, and people live there. And the name Furnace Creek, there's some water there, not much, and not a lot of people live there. But if you one of the Native American tribes, Shoshone, the Tashimi, I think is they're called, one of the Shoshone nations, a member of the Shoshone Nation, lives in Death Valley. Which is remarkable, because it's pretty austere. I mean, that's an austere place.
Yeah. I can only imagine. I can only.
So
imagine.
So feel free and I mentioned all this stuff as the world builder. Feel free to have these places. They really do exist, and you can. So it's going to feel right because it already exists. You can make this work, and if you need to look it up and see, okay, I'm going to base this on, this town in Death Valley, or I'm going to base this on, the vast weather extremes that occur, like say in the Gobi Desert, where you can have 60, 70 degree swings within a 24-hour period. It's just you go extreme cold to extreme hot in the same day. These places do exist, and they seem fantastical, and it fits right in to a fantastical world. So I bring all this up only to encourage people. You don't feel hamstrung. I mean, you can there's a lot of variation on this planet that you can emulate in your game world.
Yeah, and I think that is. It's always something that can give us a reference point. And I think, kind of like earlier, I was saying, you can mention a book or a movie or a TV show or something like that to give people a reference point. You can also give, the examples like you're talking about, a reference point, right? You can say, oh, well, it's kind of like Death Valley, but, something like this. Or it's, what is it? Helsinki, the capital of Finland, is like built on a whole bunch of little islands. It's kind of like that, it's kind of like that. And, give people some kind of reference point so they could even maybe just Google it on their phone or something and be like, oh, okay, I get it now. I see that. And then you say, well, but the elves live in underwater bubbles next to the town or whatever it is, and you give them something that they can grasp on. Well, I mean, that's really even what Hoth and, the planets of Star Wars, Dagobah, the swamp planet, because we get a swamp and we get we get snow and ice, and we get a desert, and so we can just introduce those. But then you push it to an extreme. You say, okay, well, the swamp, the whole planet's a swamp, and you're just like, oh, whoa, that'd be cool, or that'd be spooky, or something like that. So you give them a little something, and then you add your little world twist or something to it, and that way they have a better frame of reference. So I think that's really cool. And then but we did kind of dive into the weeds there after kind of staying local. But you're still recommending all this stuff should probably come out as you're playing and not necessarily before, right? Unless it's just like
exactly.
Unless maybe it's a one sentence, right? Maybe a one sentence or a two sentence kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Saying, I wanted a world with not a lot of water. So that would be kind of a controlling idea, but I don't know what that looks like yet, right? Or something like that.
Yeah, and you don't have to build the desert on your world until it's important to the story.
Yeah.
But it's just good to have an idea of what does a desert look like, and that's so the prep work for the DM and then becomes, you don't have to build this stuff, just have an understanding of it. And that's why I use this example, because that's just those general stats hopefully will give the dungeon master, the game master, whoever's designing this particular whatever part of the world you're designing at the moment. And again, I say focus on where the characters are or where you think they're going to be going, so that you can have some stuff ready. Use these things to basically give you the peace of mind that, okay, I can do this. This isn't all that. This isn't. There's stuff here in this world of ours. There's some real world data that I have now that should make me feel really comfortable that I can pretty much make whatever I like. Mm-hmm. And have something, if I really need to have more information on that, I can look it up, or I can look up a basis of it and then think about it on my own and develop it and depart from it. But you'll have at least a point of departure. And so all those stats are there. Let me do the work of deciphering all that and give it to you so that you have the realization that, okay, yeah, I can have large areas of just nothing. Or, yeah, I can have a place on my world where there's like 70-degree swings in weather in a day. Yeah, totally. You can do that. I mean, first of all, you can do it anyway. It's your world. But if you want to make it feel right, if you want to make it feel, quote, real, even though it's not real, you see my point that these are things that you can go and look at either as points of departure or that for you to emulate. And that's the only reason I bring it up is that, it really was my question of, well, what does the real world look like? I don't know. Yeah. I've flown around the earth 5 times as a pilot. I've been a lot of different places, and I've seen a lot of things, and I've seen a lot of things that are similar. I've seen a lot of things that are different. Mm-hmm. But I can't claim to have seen the entirety of it. And mm-hmm. So, who has tried to look at the entirety of the world? And this group did. And from a human geography standpoint, find out where do we live? What is going on? And it was really intriguing to find those answers. And so that gives me a point. Okay, cool. So if I have, half of my land that we're gaming in right now, I call it Pendragon. If I have half of it is pretty much just a wasteland, that's fine. I mean, that will feel right. That should feel right. But just based on what I've seen, it should feel consistent with the rest of the stuff that I've built for my world. And I haven't even looked at that section of the world, honestly, because we haven't gone over there. The party hasn't gone over there. So it's literally not fleshed out. I mean, I have no idea what's in the western portion of the world I created 14 years ago, dude. 14 years ago, still not done. And that's the goal. You don't want to be done.
Yeah.
You won't want to be done.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree because, because once it's done, it becomes a static thing and it loses some of that dynamism and interest that you can hold with your players and for yourself as a dungeon master, because, once it's all set, that feels like you don't have to create anything anymore. And that's not any fun. But I do think, that what you're saying here is really, really good because, if you're, I don't know, maybe some players might think it's cheap, but, if they say, oh, what's to the north? And you say, oh, well, that's scattered kind of dwarf villages. And you're like, oh, what's to the south? And you're like, oh, well, that's where the elves are. And you're like, okay, what's to the east? Well, that's where the predominantly human and gnome settlements are and halflings and stuff like that. And they say, oh, well, what's to the west? It is totally realistic just to say it's an utter wasteland of a wilderness of some kind, whether a forest or a desert. It's just totally realistic because it's just like there are places where, we can go and it's just like nobody lives there, right? It's just well, nobody lives there. And, one player, here or there might be like, oh, well, you just didn't want to create anything. And you're just like, no, nobody lives in this huge, vast area that's larger than the United States or something like that, because it's just like, that's real. That's totally a realistic option. It's just like, nobody lives there.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Totally realistic. The, you mentioned trees. People, how many trees are there? Well, I'll give you some numbers. In 1982, 32% of the habitable land of this earth was covered in trees, 32%. Currently, the number has risen to 38, which is nice. In the 1700s, it was 52%. According to this same study, and 5,000 years ago, it was 55%, and 10,000 years ago, 57% of the habitable land of this earth is covered in trees. That is what, according to this. So, again, use that as, I throw that out because for the world builder to, hey, if you want to have, this giant part of your land covered in trees, that should feel right and fit in and be consistent with the rest of your creation, because that in fact did happen at one point. And even today, almost over a third of the habitable land is covered in trees right now, this second, which is impressive. And if you look at Canada, well, gee whiz, there's a real world example of, what's north of us? Nothing. What do you mean? Nothing. I mean, no one lives there, dude. Yeah. No one lives there. Or very, 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 very few people live in northern Canada.
Yeah.
Well, it's
even places in the United States, I think from St. George, Utah to Fruita, Colorado, just nobody lives there, and it's hundreds and hundreds of miles. If you ever drive, Highway 70 across the country, just nobody lives there. Right. There's not a gas station. There's nothing. It's just a highway because it's connecting two places that are habitable, and I guess it would be technically habitable, but just nobody lives there. And so there's nothing to sustain anything. So it's just,
that's right. Or it's certainly not easily. And that's really what it comes down to. Yeah. People live where it's easy to live. Yeah. And that typically that means water. And then also something to eat. Something to drink and something to eat. Where can I get those easily? That's where I'm going to live. And that really is the secret to human geography. Where is it? Here's where we can live, but where is it easy to live?
Yeah.
Okay, that's where I'm going. And and most people make that. And of course, that all is determined by geography. And which is it's just magic. I mean, when you see kind of the big picture, it's just kind of like magic. You're like, wow, that's really impressive. I mean, it really kind of, and I don't begin to know all there is to know about this. I've just scratched the surface. I mean, just literally scratched the surface. Yeah. And it's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
But the other rule I have, and
I was going to say, because we're almost out of time, and we've only covered rule 1 and 1A. Yep. And so that was build the world as you play, and then the one was concentrate on local stuff, where the characters are at right now.
Where the characters are, exactly. Okay. And use the real world as your point of departure or to emulate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so now here we are, rule 2, which is lay off the lore sauce. That is rule number 2, lay off the lore sauce. And you know what I mean by this? Use
the God's War.
I use the analogy. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Don't do that, dude. Yeah, don't do that.
50 million years ago, the God's War broke and the comets fell upon the. Yes. I get. Yeah, I've been there.
Exactly. No,
I'm not making fun of anybody, Major, and anybody listening. I'm not making fun of anybody because I've done all that stuff.
Exactly, and me too. And that's how I know, dude. You got to lay off that. Here's the deal. I treat it like my analogy is use it like really hot, spicy peppers. You want to use a little, but not too much. Spending way too much time on creating backgrounds like that is a huge trap DMs fall into. Lots of DMs want to get there and they want to talk about kings and wars fought 10,000 years ago and blah, blah, blah. Nobody cares except how it affects the campaign environment currently being played in. If there's a reason that the party needs to know about some war that happened 10,000 years ago, okay, great. But how do you incorporate it in? My view is just sprinkle it in, like cooking. Choose your spices wisely. And here's kind of a overriding concept. And we got into this a little bit in the beginning. What's the general backdrop of the campaign world? Like, was it built on a previous civilization? Does something exist before whatever is there now that with the characters? Is it or has it been there for thousands of years? Is it an ancient civilization? Was there nothing there and it's just recently been built up, like in the last 100 years? Is there no civilization and you're literally in a wildland, and that's where the campaign world is? There is no civilization. Maybe that's it, or maybe whatever it may be, whatever the kind of the general backdrop is, just spice that very sparingly. Lay off the lore sauce. Because it generally is not going to matter to the campaign world but it can be used to spice up some things. Like, if there are ancient ruins and they come across some ancient ruins and you want to give a little bit of an explanation, and it's usually going to be something vague and you don't know, there's not a whole lot of data there. Well, they said a bunch of, kings used to live here 10,000 years or thousands of years ago, and that's all we know. I mean, done. That's enough.
Yeah.
It's way too easy to fall into that pit.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, because when you tend to create that stuff beforehand, it's like nobody cares about it, right? Like it's like starting your novel or your feature film out, like it's starting your novel with 100 pages of backstory nobody understands yet. It's starting your feature film with 20 minutes of narration, trying to figure out, trying to set the tone of the world without making somebody just really care about it. And I think that's when you can introduce pieces like that. I guess if it's something that directly influences the world you're in, like if you say something like, hey, 500 years ago, all magic blew up and laid waste to the world, and now we're in this weird magically desert thing, but and wizards are kind of rare, maybe okay. But
right.
if you have pages and pages of stuff, people's eyes are just going to, glaze over, and they don't care until it affects their character.
Absolutely.
Right? Until when their character realizes that they're heir to the throne of an empire that was overthrown 10,000 years ago. Well, they're going to become interested in that lore then, and not a minute before.
Exactly. Or they have to go find some relic from this bygone age.
Yeah.
Now it becomes a little bit important to them. But you're exactly right. So none of that lore stuff matters unless it's affecting the campaign right now.
Yes.
And you're exactly right. And that goes back to what are the characters doing now? That's what you need to build. And the lore stuff, dude, just keep that on the shelf, spice it in as needed, but it generally is not until it is. And again, let the campaign guide. Again, it gets back to play, then build. Don't build and play. Yeah, you can build that as needed during play.
Yeah.
And exactly. You're exactly right. The last thing is I want to talk about, and I know we run out of time here, is I call it going medieval on you, law, tech, and magic. One of the medieval, going medieval on you, law, tech, and magic.
Okay, yeah.
Medieval-esque Europe is a staple of most fantasy role-playing. Some sort of medieval, quasi-medieval-like. I mean, a lot of D&D's kind of sentiment. Are kind of like this. A lot of fantasy role-playing games are set in a world kind of like this. And of course, there's lots of different settings, and that's great. But that provides ample examples for government and technology levels from history. I will give you a couple of sources that I find very, very helpful to me. An invaluable resource is a PDF that's free. You can get it on, just search on Google for Medieval Demographics Made Easy by S. John Ross. You can just search on the web. It'll pop up. It's free. Just download it. Do that. Oh, my goodness, do that. Medieval Demographics Made Easy by S. John Ross. One of the best things I've ever read on emulating settlements and things in your areas that are settled and making it feel right. And he also goes through some historical data to show why this feels right. A book from the library I found very useful is Life in a Medieval City by Joseph and Francis Geiss. It's from 1981. It was printed. It's very, very helpful to kind of emulate hey, what is there to do in this city? There's a lot of course, there's a lot of good information out there, but this is actual book on historical medieval cities. Again, point of departure or a point to emulate, your choice. Yeah. And there's another source that you can pay for, but I think is worthwhile. Is called A Magical Medieval Society, Western Europe by Joseph Browning and Susie V. You can get that on RPG Now. It's a classic, kind of like the Kobold Quarterly Worldbuilding. It's just a venerable classic. And of course, you make a lot of really good stuff in this regard. Like I mentioned earlier, those terrain. I'm telling you, man, those terrain books, those are sharp. I really like those.
Well, thank you.
And then decide on magic levels. That's something you might want to do. Is it magic core? Is it magic common? That's probably something that you should kind of talk with the group about before play. And it doesn't mean that it has to be that way invariably. You may be in an area where it's magic core, but that doesn't mean there's not magic maybe in the more civilized areas. That doesn't have to be universal, in other words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point as well. It's just like some of these things that could just be the local area that they don't have any wizards around or whatever, and I think that's a good point for people to understand. It's just like, oh, well, you grew up in an area of the country where there's not much magic. Well, you go to this big city and there's a huge university for wizards, and it's going to change. It's going to flip your world upside down. No, I really like some of that. And I think, kind of digging into some of those sources can be very helpful, because I think one of the issues is we kind of have on, 21st century modern day goggles sometimes, right? We have on these goggles, and what that does though, and, maybe you don't want to make it exactly like, a medieval setting or whatever, and you don't want to get too crunchy or whatever about it. But like, I think there are some things like if we can just kind of take off those goggles a little bit, and it opens up some some very interesting story ideas and adventure possibilities. And like what you're saying, like you mentioned my terrain guides that I put out. Some of my idea behind that was in our world, we kind of we grow up in this kind of suburban or urban area. Most of us do probably, and and we we think of a forest as a forest. Right. We don't think about enchanted forests, elder forests, forests in different climates, non-temperate forests, or a rainforest, or a different, there's so many different types of forests, instead of this, the dungeon master say, oh, you're walking through a forest, the idea behind a lot of that is just to add in. It's like, well, what kind of forest is it? Just to ask a couple little questions, just so we break ourselves out of, kind of this similar mold, so we're not just doing the same thing over and over again, not to give the game master tons of work or anything. It's just to make the play and the game more interesting and add a little bit of detail. And actually I had an interview, I don't know if it'll air after or before this, but I interviewed Tristan Zimmerman, once a month or once every other month on the podcast. And we were just talking about, he writes articles about history and using history in role-playing games. And we were just talking about like police forces, or city guards, as we would call them, in cities and Dungeons and Dragons. And I think so often we just imagine, kind of our world, but with some medieval dressing on, and we imagine city guards as like police officers just with chainmail on or something. And, and that they're always around the corner or something, right? Like the city guard was oftentimes a haphazard, thing at best that basically just looked to see if anything was on fire. They didn't necessarily enforce laws or anything. Exactly. And so I think, we take off those goggles a little bit. It can open up some more story possibilities, because you're just like, a group is like, oh, well, the blacksmith stole something from us. We're just going to break into his shop. It's like, oh, we should wait until night. You may not have to, right? Like, who's going to stop you, right? Like, if he stole your horse, you may just be able just to walk up there and bust in the door, and nobody's going to care, right? Like, this may happen. So I think that is a really good point to try to, we can look at some of those sources, and I'm sure everybody loves history. So if you're just reading about some of the sources you're mentioning, they can be a really good starting point if you think you've kind of left your 21st century goggles on. Yeah, absolutely.
It is really, it is. I find them very helpful. And there's so many others that I could throw in, but those three I found the most impactful for me. Those three I go back to over and over. And there's a lot of great stuff out there, but those three I wanted to mention specifically. And again, like you said, what kind of forest is it in? These are the things I want to stress, because if you focus on where the characters are and developing that area down to, what kind of forest? Yeah, let's talk about that and put your energies there. Don't put your energies in what happened 10,000 years ago or what's on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
Put your energies into developing where the characters are. Yeah. And let's talk about what kind of forest is it? What's the season right now? What's the weather? How does it feel? Is there rain? I love having a druid in the party because it makes me think about weather. Because a druid will say, hey, what's the weather going to be tomorrow? Because they have that power.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's a good question. Let me tell you. And so now the weather has become part of the campaign because the player has an ability to determine that.
Yeah.
And they've been outdoors a lot. Like currently they're in the underground. So there's no real weather there, or is there? I don't know. Maybe there's weather, but a form of weather. But no. Anyway, that's the kind of the crux of my lesson is to just kind of recap is just focus on what's important. Focus on that. Stay focused. That's really the overriding message. Stay focused. And what's important is where the party is, and don't build, then play and build.
Yeah.
And make everyone, and that'll maximize your fun, which is the goal here.
Yeah.
And there's some other things we could talk about, like, how to, what to put on the map, how to put on a map, impromptu mapping, how to quickly generate some towns, which really I love that thing. That's one of your products I own that I use a lot. Is you're just the town book.
Yeah.
I mean, those are great. If you just need what's in this town, you can I use the same town, just change the name to. No one knows. No one will ever know.
Yeah.
They'll never know because they don't remember it from last time.
Yeah. And yeah, absolutely. And I thank you for mentioning my town book there, but my views on, hey, St. Louis is a gaming mecca, man. And if people don't know that, there's a lot of great talent right here in St. Louis that are working together. Me, a bunch of other people that this is a really great gaming town. Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned Tristan Zimmerman. He's based here. I mentioned I've interviewed Matt Corley, who has done some incredible work with Sandy Peterson and the creators of Call of Cthulhu. They're all in this area. Awesome. They're all in this area. So that is really, really, really cool. And I did like what you said there, about the towns book, because and what we're talking about here, I think, it's easy for a game master or dungeon master to get overwhelmed when you start thinking about this, but it really only becomes overwhelming if you're thinking about places where your characters aren't, right?
Right.
If your players are in a certain place, you can really just kind of hone in on that and ask yourself a few simple questions to really understand. It's not that the great rainforest on the other side of the world needs to be all fleshed out if they're not there. Right.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so that's when things, I think, when people feel like, oh my gosh, I got to create this whole world. And it's like, no, just where the players are, where the characters at, where are they at right now? And that's one of my ideas with the town book, really. And I go so far, and I know I've gotten a couple negative reviews on it, even though I get a lot of positive reviews. I got some negative reviews on it because some people don't understand what I'm trying to do. And they'll say something like, oh, in the towns book, that I didn't number the buildings in the town and then say this was the blacksmith shop and this was the inn. And I did that on purpose because if the players walk in the east gate, I don't want the inn to be on the west side of town if I want them to go to that inn, right? I want the inn to be right in front of them. And so that was done very much on purpose, very much, consciously, because, I don't want to say, oh, well, you have to go to the inn. And what are they going to say? They're going to be like, oh, where is it? Oh, it's all across town. And it takes like 4 hours to walk there. And they're going to be like, oh, well, we don't go there.
Exactly. I mean, bingo. And Matt, I want to say, me personally as a dungeon master, and have been for, a long time now. I've got all these gray hairs attest to that. I prefer that flexibility. In fact, most of the products that I use, like if I'm using pre-generated, which I do all the time, by the way, I love things, especially I love or like, I just kind of rip it apart and change it all up anyway. If I want to, if I need to. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I leave it exactly as is because I think it's perfect. But I love that flexibility where you didn't do that. So now I can, because I'm probably going to change it anyway.
Yeah.
And I encourage DMs to do that for sure. Make it yours. Make it fit your world. Make it fit. That's really what I'm saying. I'm not saying do it just for the sake of doing it. Do it only if you need to make it fit. And that's why I like your product. Like I said, I know I've mentioned it before too, is because it's so flexible. That's what I like about it. Yeah.
Well, thank you. All right. Well, Major, we could probably keep talking for another 2 hours.
We can. So. One last thing. One last thing.
Okay, yes.
Two plugs. One, please visit my website. If you guys would, please visit my website, www.themajorpress.com, and the link will be on the page here. Also, a product that I came across recently. This is a painting aid. I really feel strongly about this. The guy that does these, retired doctor, name is Robert Kennedy. He's the nicest man in the world. I swear, such a nice guy. I only met him from buying his product. It's for painting miniatures, yeah, and it's for mixing your paint. I know there's a lot of mixers out there right now, but this is the Cadillac of them all, in my opinion. It's typhoonpainting.com is the website. www.typhoonpainting. Like the storm, typhoonpainting.com. These things are amazing. Just check out the website. I mean, they're beefy. Like the one I got is 12 pounds of iron, of steel and motor. I mean, this sucker is incredible, and it'll mix your paint. Trust me.
Right.
And keep it perfectly blended. For those that paint miniatures, that you'll understand why that's important. Do yourself a favor and get one.
All right. And I will be sure to put links to your website, themajorpress.com, in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So anybody who's listening can check that out. And also, I will probably just throw a link up to your alignment guide that you have on the DMs Guild as well. So people can check that out. And And because I think, all of this stuff is really great, and you have some really great information in your alignment guide, and you had some great information today on world building. So Major, just thank you so much for coming on the show once again. And I'll look forward to talking to you in the future, I bet.
Excellent, Matt. You bet, man. I'd love to come back, and we'll set up another time. And thanks again, Matt, for having me.
All right, there you have it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed my conversation with the Major today. As always, in the show notes at dicegeeks.com, you will find links where you can explore the Major's PDFs and his website. He offers lots of awesome tips for helping game masters and dungeon masters. You should check it out. If you want some free stuff, the link is dicegeeks.com/free. You will get free PDFs. You will get an email update from me every Friday letting you know what is going on in the wild, wild world of Dice Geeks, and a few little extra things. So go check that out. All right, now, guys, I really appreciate you listening to the podcast. I really appreciate you supporting my work here. If you would like, rate, review, or subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening, that would be awesome. If you want to support the show financially, you can do so at patreon.com/dicegeeks. You can also buy my books on Amazon, DriveThruRPG, or my own website, dicegeeks.com. Those help me out as well. Again, I just thank you so much for listening, and until next Wednesday, keep gaming!